Hey everyone, hi and welcome. My name is Candace Cobb. I'm the Technical Marketing Engineer here at RISA, and I want to welcome you to today's webinar, and we'll be going over the RISA-3D and RISA-connection integration. So welcome. So a little housekeeping things is for our audio options for Zoom. So most of you will probably connect with your computer audio, but if you are having trouble with your computer audio connecting, then I would check, your device or something like that. But if you're still having issues, you can always do the call-in option, which you can see that information above for the meeting ID number and the dial-in number for your cell phone or telephone. Another thing is we do have a chat box for your questions, and that is monitored by my colleague, Ben. Ben will be there to answer any questions or issues you have throughout the webinar. So yeah, go ahead and put those in that chat box below. So yeah, we'll go ahead and get started with a little bit of background on our products, our RISA products. So the main product that we'll be discussing today is going to be our RISA-3D, and then we're looking at that integration with RISA-connection. Another thing is we're going to be looking at our RISA, another products that we have are our RISA-4, RISA Foundation, RISA-2D, and then our RISA section. And so when we're talking about integration, RISA integrate, restore, RISA Foundation, again, we're going to be talking about RISA-connection today, but also it has this RISA section, which looks at the sections. Oh, sorry about that, everyone. So you didn't really couldn't see what I was talking about, but what I was talking about was looking at our other product lines that we have for RISA. So RISA is going to be our multi-story building modeling software. RISA Foundation is, like it's in its name, you're looking at foundation, so your retaining walls and your mat slabs and things like that. I'm looking at designing those. RISA section is going to be looking at when you're looking at very custom section shapes, and if you want to import those section shapes as DXF files and get those property values, and then you can then import those custom properties, shape properties into your RISA-3D files. And so like I was saying, RISA-3D integrates with RISA-4, RISA Foundation, and then also RISA-connection we're looking at today. And RISA-2D is going to be the 2D version of RISA-3D, where we're looking at 2D frames and modeling. Our latest product that we've launched is RISA-Calc. RISA-Calc is a web-based software that we have, and it's going to be looking at structural components. So you can see a little bit in this GIF here, we have each components there. We've got different wall footings, spread footings. And so it's going to be looking at designing each of those structural components. And just like in our RISA floor or RISA-3D, you can look at the detail reports for those as well. So you can have those very detailed reports with the calculations that it's using for each of those components. And so the web-based is very different from our other software. So it makes it, easier for you to kind of interact with your different colleagues, and all they need is a web browser to log in and look at your multiple connections or multiple components under that. So under Adapt products, if we're looking at these two products right here, is we have Adapt PTRC and then we have Adapt Builder. And so these two products specialize in concrete design. Adapt PTRC, and the PT stands for post-tension, and the RD, reinforced concrete. That's going to be your 2D concrete slab and beam design software. And then Adapt Builder is going to be the full 3D finite element concrete building design software. And so included in the design is going to be your beams, slabs, columns, walls, foundations. So today's agenda is going to be just an intro of what is RISA-connection, if you're not already familiar with it. And then we're going to look at setting up connections within RISA-3D. And then we'll use that director function, is like what we like to call it. But that's really transferring your connections into RISA-connection from your RISA-3D file. Next, we're going to solve those connections in RISA-connection, and then we're going to show you a little bit of solving connections in RISA-3D platform as well. And our final thing is going to be troubleshooting, which may be the most important aspect that we're looking at, because it's really going to help you progress through your modeling and actually get the results that you need if you run into issues. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull up RISAConnection. Just to show you a little bit of what RISAConnection does. Is up here is going to be in your toolbar. So anytime I'm talking about toolbars, I'm going to be talking up here in this ribbon. So here in the Home tab, we're going to click a new connection. So here in the new connection tab, we have all of these, we like to call them modules. So in the modules, they're split up into shear, moment, truss, brace, and then base plate. And so that's how all the connection types are separated. If I click on shear, it's going to pull up all the connect types over here. And so if I just want to choose, a column beam clip angle connection. And then down here, you can change the connection name if you want. So we're going to do a test shear connection down here. And then we can add this to the current project that we have or create a new project. Down here in detail view, if I click detail, it's just going to show you a quick little preview of the ISO view of that connection type, and then also some of its properties as well. So I can click create connection. And here, RISAConnection has created this connection for me. I want to talk to you first about the Project Explorer. So here in the Project Explorer on the right upper side is going to be the connection name that I named it. So that's where I typed in that shear. Next is going to be our unity checks or our UC, and then it's also going to have this pass-fail. Going back up here in our toolbar, I wanted to also show you here, if you go to your units, this is where you would set your different units. So if you want standard imperial, which is what I have set currently, or if you can switch it and you want standard metric. You can also go down into these drop downs under lengths, dimension, forces, and you can choose what specific unit dimensions that you want assigned. If you have certain dimension sets that you're already used to using, you can assign those here, and then you can save these to your default settings. I'm going to go back to my standard imperial, and then I'll click OK. Next is going to be the settings. Here in settings, if you're familiar with our RISA product, you have this descriptions where you can enter in, your company information, designer, etc., any notes that you have. But the important thing is I want you to look at the solution tab, because here's where you're going to set your codes. So in this dropdown, these are all the codes that we have available for RISAConnection and the ASE and LRFD options. And so this is where you would select that option for when you start to input your loads. Clicking OK here. Now I want to come down here to my connection properties. So again, we have that connection title name and that type that we chose, and we chose this shear connection, this clip angle. Under here in the connection category, this is going to be looking at your right or left beam connection if you're looking at welded, or if they're going to be bolted. Down below in this next section is going to be your loading. So this is where you would manually enter your loading for your shear load, your actual load, etc. And then here, remember before in that code section, we defined if we were using ASE or LRFD. This is where the program is reminding you what you have set kind of here. So the next is going to be components. So components refers to all of these elements that are in your connection. And so here in my 3D view of my connection, I can select all of these individual components. So I can select the left or the right beam, and then I can select the columns. You can also use your mouse on your cursor to then pan around to view the connection in 3D. So if I pan around, I can see, oh, now I can see my angles, and I can select these clip angles. And if you've been noticing, here on the right-hand side in the properties, it's highlighting the components that I'm selecting in the 3D view. Below the 3D view is also a 2D view. So here in the 2D view, I have the option to view my front, left, right side, or my top view. And again, just like in the 3D view, I can select the components, and the components are going to highlight here on the right-hand side in my properties view. Another thing is I can select the dimensions as well. And you see RISAConnection is so helpful that it has even highlighted the dimension that I'm looking for. So then that way, if I wanted to edit this, to update it, let's say I want to make that 3 inches, it's going to automatically do that behavior. Back up here in the toolbar, I can also choose to turn on or off my bolts in the visibility. And I can also choose to turn on and off the dimensions. And the same as we pan through these left-right views, we can also do that up here in the toolbar as well. The last thing I wanted to show you here in this interface is the reports. So like I said, if you're familiar with our other RISA products, we have these reports which are, called detailed reports. So detailed reports are going to show you the equations and the information that it's using for these unity checks and these pass fails that we were looking at before. So up here on the top, I've got several tabs. The first tab is going to be your summary tab. And the summary is going to essentially give you all of the summary detail for the individual sections. But if I go to the individual section, so for instance, this is failing in the column section. So if I go to the column connection here, this column tab is going to tell us all the pass and the fails for each different limit state. And then if I click on, if I want to expand upon, well, why is this failing for our bolt prime? I can click down below and then I can start to check, okay, so prime is being considered because my T-min is less than the angle of my, the actual thickness of my clip angle. So that helped me kind of troubleshoot in a way to figure out why my connections may be failing in certain aspects or avenues. And then I can go back, I'll show you that technique here. If I want to go back to my 3D view and select this clip angle, and then it highlights that component on my right-hand side. All these little carets or arrows are drop downs. So I can click this caret or drop down to then show all the additional properties for this left clip angle. And so here in this clip angle, I have my material, I have my angle orientation. But remember from that detail report, we were seeing that I was failing because of thickness. So let's say I want to go ahead, click on this. This will open all of my angle section shapes. And I want to bump up this angle thickness. So I want to select it there and I can click OK. And then let's go back to our reports. So this one is still failing a little bit, so we need to bump that up some more. But that's essentially how you would go through to try to update your model for these RISAConnection types. So that's just a brief overview of this interface of RISAConnection. And I wanted to give you that because now we're going to be looking at RISA-3D and how it interfaces with the standalone RISAConnection. So if I drop that low, I'm just going to bring up RISA-3D now. So here in RISA-3D, I already have this model created. I already have several braces in here. I also have assigned several other connections. And what we're going to do first is when you already have your model modeled, and what's really great about having this interface with RISAConnection is you have all of these members here. If you have several connections already assigned, and we can use our director function to RISAConnection, it'll really save you time. You saw me when the standalone of RISAConnection, I had to build that individual connection. I had to import the load or insert the loads that I wanted on that connection type. But if I already have the loads calculated in RISA-3D, I can just use this director function. So the first step you really want to do is you want to first design your connection rules. So over here in the data entry on the right-hand side of the Explorer, we can go to connection rules. Here in connection rules, RISA-3D, when you first install it, kind of comes with all of these default connection rules already here.
I apologize, everybody. It looks like we may have lost Candace for a moment. So it's not just you, it's all of us. And now she's completely out of the meeting. So let's give her a second to get back. I apologize for the inconvenience here. While we're waiting, there's a couple questions that came in, so I can go ahead and answer maybe some of those live here. Somebody asked the question about the capability to do an extended shear plate connection. So we don't have specifically an extended shear plate connection if you're just looking for a shear tab connection. Certainly you can, with your shear tab connection, move the bolt lines and manipulate the distance, which we would call the clearance between the column and the beam itself. So you could make that, 5 inches if you want, and extend the plate by adding different bolts and stuff like that. But I know there are very specific conditions for checking those types of connections. So we don't have something very specific for that. We do, although, have extended extended shear plate brace connections or shear tab brace connections. So I know that's one that we just recently added. So there's diagonal vertical braces with, instead of kind of using a gusset plate, basically have this much larger plate that the beam and the brace are connected to. So that's one of the options there in the extended shear plate tab connections. But if that's not exactly what you're looking for, then obviously we can kind of test it out. One of the other things here is that if you're new to RISA-connection, you always have the option. If you never had RISA-connection or you don't have RISA-connection, you always had the option to get a trial of RISA-connection. So you can just go to RISA.com or portal.risa.com, and you can request a free 10-day trial. That's a full version, no limits on that. You can kind of test out any of the connections. There's another question that came here. Does RISA have plans to implement shear lugs in the base plate designer? So we actually have plans to kind of redo our base plate designer in totality. So right now, what we do is we actually integrate with Hilti Profis for the design of the anchorage for the most part. And so, and that a lot of that reason was because we had the opportunity we saw the opportunity where a lot of people were doing that type of design anyways. They wanted to spec out Hilti stuff. Since that's become less and less, and so we're actually talking about one of the next things that we're doing is bringing all the anchorage checks back into RISA-connection. So we would include all the anchorage checks for the concrete for the base plate. And as a result, I know that we've talked about implementing shear lugs as well, and other types. There's friction types of restraint, and having a little key and stuff like that as an option as well. So we do have those things on our kind of our database there. So looks like Candace is back here. And so I'm going to go ahead and kick it back over to Candace, and she can kind of take us the rest of the way home.
Yes, thank you, Ben. Thank you, everyone, for your patience. So what we were talking about before I cut out was the connection rules. And so setting those connection rules, and here under, you can type in the label, but then you can also over here in the connection type define your shear moment, brace, or base plate or truss connections. As you filter into each connection type, the type over here is going to filter based on that connection type. So when I selected moment, it's going to automatically filter all the RISA connection types for the moment connections. If I toggle it back to the shear, it'll do the same. And then it's also going to go ahead and toggle your beam connection to be bolted or welded, or over here for your column girder connection, it's going to be bolted or welded as well. In this spreadsheet, you can also enter in additional connections. So let's say if you didn't have all these default connections already in here, but you need to add one, it's as simple as, pressing enter on your rows. It's going to add in a new row, and it's going to be that row 33, and then you can just rename it here. If I just call this an example connection, and then it's going, and then you can assign your connection type, and then select them and drop down over here as well. If I don't need all these default connections, which I won't for this example, I can also go in here and delete several of them. So if I want to go in and delete several of these as well, I can select them, right click, and I can delete the selected rows. And I'm going to click OK. And so that's kind of lowered or decreased the number of connection types that we have in here, because we might not need all of these assigned in our solving when we're looking at our specific model. So after you look at your spreadsheets and you have those assigned, next I'm going to go back to our 3D model view, and I'm going to start assigning some connections to the member ends. So you can do this like two ways. The first one is over here back in our Explorer spreadsheets here in members. You can find the member here on the side. And right now we're in the primary tab. I'm going to go ahead and toggle over to this RISA-Connection because that's where we want to be. Here in RISA-Connection tab of your member spreadsheet, this is where you can start to enter in your start and end connections. So over here, you can do the drop down and you can select the start connection or the end connection for each member. The second option to assign your member end connections, if I close out of here and I go back to is to select your member, and that's going to open up your properties window here on the left-hand side. And if you're already familiar with your properties window, you have your general properties and you have your design properties, but now you also have this RISA-Connection properties. And then that's where you're going to assign your start and your end connection. So I already have some assigned here, but you may be wondering, how do I know what's my start and what's my end connection? Well, a good way to look at that is if I come up here to home, I'm going to go to this drop down arrow here. And this is in my quick view of my home tab. In the quick view of my home tab, there's an option to display my I/J ends. So my I/J ends are going to help me define or correspond to my start and my end connections that we're looking at in our properties. So for example, this model has already been drawn so that all of my J ends are on this side of my warehouse that I have here are already defined as being towards the bottom of my base plate like connections. So I know that I want my J ends to be my ends, and then my I's are going to be my start connections. So if I go back up here to my quick view, I'm going to toggle now to connection rules. So here under connection rules, and I'm going to zoom in so that you can see this a little better. So I'm looking at this brace frame over here, and I'm going to select this brace. And so remember, my J was my end. And so if looking at my end connection here, back in my RISA-Connection properties, it's going to be my base plate with vertical brace. And so that's how you can use your I and J end visibilities in your graphics to help you discern which is going to be your end connection and then which is going to be your start connection. Zooming out a little bit more. So I want to show you the differences between this brace over here, and then I have another brace over here. So over here, I have my diagonal vertical braces and my base plate with vertical braces. So important to note that at each of these connections, so if I'm looking at this base plate connection down here, I want to assign the same rule to this connection area. So that's why my column at this connection end has been assigned the base plate with vertical brace, and then this brace at this connection end has been assigned the same connection. That's going to help you avoid some of those invalid or errors that you may receive you're trying to assign different type of connection types. Another way that you can visually see this is by these color-coded legends or combinations here. When I turned on my connection rules and my visibility graphics, and again, that was here in Home under Quick View, and then selecting my connection rules, it gives me this legend here on the top right-hand side. So I can use this legend and this color coding just to quickly tell me if I assigned the same connections at my connection ends to help me kind of pre-troubleshoot any possible errors that I may have done. So zooming out, again, we can see quickly, we at this upper connection, we have all these are color-coded to be the same blue, which is going to be our diagonal vertical brace. So if I had another connection here and it was assigned to maybe a different yellow or burgundy color, that would just give me a quick visual way to tell me that I have different type of connection sets to a singular connection, and maybe I need to change that so I don't get any invalid errors. So I'm looking at this specific brace here because I wanted to essentially show you its sister or brother here on the left-hand side. So as you can see, this one is assigned something different. It's got different colors up here at this brace, and it's called a seismic diagonal brace. And so you may be thinking, well, why is this one assigned differently than its sibling over here on the upper right hand? And that's because I want to show you how to assign seismic connections here in RISA-3D. So when we assigned connections, non-seismic connections, we went over here, we had our connection rules, and then we selected the members, and then we came over to our RISA-connection properties, and we entered the start connection and the end connection. But what about when I have seismic rules? So when I have seismic connections that I want to assign seismic rules, I need to do some additional steps. And so one of those steps is first, I need to assign seismic design rules in my RISA-3D model. So I'm going to open the spreadsheet over here, the seismic design rules spreadsheet. And then here, I'm going to be in my hot rolled frame, and I'm going to have several seismic design rules already assigned in here. And you can enter in the same as we saw with our RISA connection rules. You can enter in additional rows here to add additional seismic rules. And you'll set your parameters that you want for those specific rules in each of the columns assigned here. After you've assigned those design rules for your seismic, I'm going to close this window, and then with my member selected, on the left-hand side here, I'm going to go back in my properties, and I want to look at the design property here. And first I have my function set lateral, but then right below that, I have my seismic design rule or seismic DR. And then I'm going to do this drop down, and I'm going to select from those seismic design rules that we just saw in the seismic rules spreadsheet. The third thing we want to do is, instead of selecting that vertical brace that we saw at its sibling, we actually want to select the seismic version of that. And you'll see once we solve this model and we go into RISA-connection, why all of these three steps were important, because they're going to help us populate those seismic design rules in RISA-connection when solving the seismic connection, and avoid, again, another possibility of having any invalid errors or things like that. So, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn off my seismic rules. I'm going to switch my labels back to just regular labels. And I'm now going to go to our load combinations. So here in our load combinations, we want to go to the design tab. In the design tab is where we have all of our load combinations set, but we have this additional tab here that's called connection. So with this checkbox being checked, that's telling RISA-3D that we want this load combination to be designed and then directed with your connections over to RISA-Connection. And so that's why it's very important for you to make sure that whatever load combinations you want to include in your connection design, have this checkbox marked for each load combination that you want to be included in that RISA-Connection. And so really, that's the final setup step that we have. And finally, we can go and solve our model. And the first thing we want to do is we want to solve the solution in this model. And so I can go up here to the equal sign and I can do a batch plus envelope, or you can do a single connection or a single load combination, excuse me. And so this is important because you need to solve the model so that you can get all of those loadings and reactions that are happening each of these members so that they can properly then transfer over to our RISA-Connection design files and can be included in those RISA-Connection designs. So now that we have all of this solution information available here in RISA-3D, we can use this information now to director. And again, that director just means we're transferring this information to integrate with RISA-Connection. And you see here, we have that RISA floor, RISA foundation, and then RISA-Connection here below. It's going to ask me to save the file, which you want to do. And so it's going to be saving the results, and it's going to be pulling up your RISA-Connection. And so I'm just going to click no on that previous project we were working on. And now it's going to pull up all the connections that we had assigned in RISA-3D. And you can see that here in this graphical window over here, and it's basing it off of the groups. Or again, in this Project Explorer on the right-hand side, these are also going to be our connection groups as well. So if I collapse these are going to be our same connection type groups over here on the right-hand side. And as I click on each group, it's going to change this graphical window to show you the connections that are involved in that group. So several things here. If I can click on one of the connections in this group, and it'll open up that connection, and it's going to show me the column that's going to be the same column size from your RISA-3D file that you set. So all the information that you have from your RISA-3D file has transferred now over into your RISA-Connection file, ready for you to design. Another thing up here in the tabs up above, the Home tab, is I want to show you the settings again. So here in the settings, this is going to be controlled and directed from your information from your RISA-3D file. So when we were looking at our settings in RISA and we were looking at the specific codes, this is that code that's coming from RISA-3D. So it's going to be that LRFD code. Another thing is up here in the toolbar, we have this detach project option. This detach project option is going to be if we want to detach this RISA-Connection project file from our RISA-3D file. So right now, these files are linked so that we can edit the information for the connections in here and then take it back to our RISA-3D file to save. But if you detach it, it's no longer going to be able to link back to your RISA-3D file. So you just want to be careful if you decide to use this detach function. And we note that when you click detach, it's going to give you this warning because we just want to make absolutely sure that you want to detach it because they're going to lose the interconnectivity you have with RISA-3D. Up here in the toolbar is I also have my solve functions. So I can choose to solve a connection, a group, or the entire project. So I've selected this connection right here. So in my Project Explorer here, we're under the group base plate with vertical brace. And then we have our connection, which is at member 805 and at the J end. So if I want to solve this one connection here, I can choose to solve it here under the connection. And so now RISA-Connection is going to solve this connection type for just this singular connection. And I want to show you this additional information that it gives you. So you saw when we were in RISA-Connection, the standalone version, we just looked at the unity check and we had the pass fail. Now we have this additional information where we have the LC12, which stands for the load combination 12. And so this is going to be the governing load combination that we have for this connection design. Looking down here below for this same connection, you can see here, now we have this load combination. So we didn't see that in our standalone version of RISA-Connection. That's because now it has all the load combinations populated from our RISA-3D file, which is why this tool is so powerful to integrate between RISA-3D and RISA-Connection. Here you can use the drop down and you can see all of the load combinations that transferred with that interconnectivity between RISA-3D and then RISA-Connection. So if I wanted to look at the different statuses of the different load combinations, I can toggle between those. I'm going to expand on some more. So if I want to now solve an entire group, I can choose this group of projects or connections, and I can choose to solve the group up here. And so now you can see that it solved this entire group without me having to go in and solve each individual connection. And then again, we can now come up here and we can just solve this entire project. And you see it's going through all the 6 different groups, and now it's solving each individual projects that we have. And I can expand on these as well. So clicking on some of these projects over here, I'm going to look at my base plate with vertical brace. I want to select this first connection. So again, we can see in our 3D view, this connection type. I can see in my 2D view, the connection as well, the base plate, and then the gussets, as well as the other dimensions. I'm going to go to reports. And so here in reports, there's additional information telling me where it has failed. So this is in the summary view, but now I can go up to these tabs just like we saw in the standalone version, and I can toggle through these to find where I'm starting to fail and why. So it looks like I'm failing due to the Whitmore section. So I can go through and maybe I want to edit one specific connection type. So if I want to edit this one connection type, I can go over here to our connection properties on the right-hand side. If I want to edit the base plate, again, I can select it from and using this drop-down caret. And maybe I want to increase the width here to, maybe I want this to be 25 inches or so. Or, I can, again, go back here in the 3D view. If I wanted to, I could have selected the base plate as well, and that would have highlighted it for me. If I want to select the welds, I can do that as well. And it's going to select me the web weld, or if I want to select the flange weld as well. And that can help me direct me straight to the areas that I may want to edit. So maybe if I want to edit this, I could edit that as well. And so back here in the reports, you can choose to recalculate this calculation. And so if I recalculate this with my new edits that I made to my base plate size, then look, now we are passing and it has updated that information. But that may be a lot of work. If you have similar base plate connections throughout your model, maybe you don't want to have to update each individual connection like I just did. Well, the good news there is I can go to my overall group by clicking here in the Project Explorer. And here it's going to select essentially all the properties for my group that's defined as the base plate with vertical brace. And I can go now here, and maybe I want to update all of the base plates in this group to be that 25 inches. And then I can go and I can solve that entire group. So now if I select one of my other connections, it's going to show me in that base plate group that is updated the width to be that 25 inches to match what I just did for my other connections. So that's a way to also quickly update several of your connections within groups. If you want them to have similar base plates, for a more economical design, if you want to start to have them to be a more standard size. So once you've gone through, and maybe you've gone through and edited all of your different connection types over here, and you've gotten all of these to pass, you can start to then go back and take all of this information back to your RISA-3D file, like I was describing earlier. So back up here in our home toolbar, we have this export to RISA-3D /RISA floor. And so we're going to go back to our RISA-3D model by clicking the export. And so it's essentially saving the file and then going back to our RISA-3D model. And so opening back my RISA-3D model, now you can see these connection design results. And so to access this spreadsheet on your own, I'm going to close it as if it didn't pop up, but it's under here, under results spreadsheet on the right-hand side. You're going to go to the bottom where it has connection results. And some of the information that is now translated from your RISA-connection file is going to have your member labels and the member ends, your connection rules that we had assigned, and it's transferring that pass-fail results for each of those connection ends. It's also going to give you your unity checks that we saw in RISA-connection and those governing load combinations that we're looking at. And I think the most important part is when you're starting to look at your specific failure modes and things like that, if you want just a nice, concise way to look at it versus looking at the full detail report of your RISA-connection, is this limit state column. So this is going to tell you, even if it passed, what was the limit state for deciding what the governing load combination was. And it's going to tell you that in this quick, concise spreadsheet back here in RISA-3D for all of your connections. So here you have geometry restrictions, and those are going to tell you those information as well in just a quick, concise way back here in RISA-3D. So we've gone through directoring and setting up our connections here in RISA-3D, directoring to RISA-connection. But I also want to look at what happens when we get some of those invalid connection errors that I was discussing with you earlier. And so I want to show you just a very quick example of what those look like and what are some of the things that you can do. So I have my model here, like I said, and I'm going to turn on the rendered view so that you can see some of the shapes. So here in my rendered view of my RISA-3D model, I have my columns, which are wide flanges, and I have tubes for my braces. I'm going to select my columns. And I'm going to change these columns from wide flanges, and I'm going to change them. Let's say if I want to just change these to be channels. Maybe we got a request from the developer or the architect that, maybe they don't want wide flanges, they want a channel shape for some reason to be for these connections or for this model or column types. So if I change these to be channels, I am going to first, remember, we're going to solve the model, and I'm just going to solve like the first load combination so that we can see that really quickly. I'm going to solve that. And then I want to show you another really cool thing about solving models with the integration between RISA-3D and RISA-connection is you saw I solved my solution for my RISA-3D file, and you've seen me solve my connections within RISA-connection. But if I just made this quick update to the section size, I can also solve these design connections here in RISA-3D. So if I click my design connections, and I'm going to click solve, and we're going to, again, it's going to still use that. I'm going to click yes. It's already telling me I have input connections in the model that are invalid. So if you've done some type of invalid framing for your RISA connection, RISA is going to help you by giving you these warnings and this information as to, hey, these are not valid and this is why they're not going to be designed. So I want to continue? Yes, because I want to go ahead and design the rest of my connections in the model that are valid, and then I can start to see the additional information. So here in the connection design results spreadsheet, remember you access that down here under your results spreadsheets. I can look in that limit state column again, and it's going to tell me, if I make it a little bigger, it's going to tell me again the member label and the member end, and it's going to give me additional information as to, hey, this connection has invalid or missing supporting members. And so it's giving you information like, hey, something that I've modeled in this model has turned out to be incorrect. And so I need to go back and I need to look at what could I possibly done wrong. And so for this specific example, the issue that we have is that these columns are channels. One of the limitations of this connections type is that the columns can only be wide flanges, tubes. There's certain shapes that this connection allows. And so you're like, well, how do I figure that out? Well, you can go to our help file, and to access the help file in RISA-3D or in RISAConnection is you can do your F1 tab on your keyboard. For some users, depending on your keyboard, you may do FN, F1. And so that's going to pull up here, and it's going to pull up our help file. And so here in our help file, this is where you can start to use your troubleshooting to figure out, okay, what did I assign incorrectly? So if you remember from our RISA-3D model, we were looking at that column and we were looking at that base plate connection. So if I go down here to my brace to base plate connection type, it's telling me down here, hey, columns can only be wide flanges, tubes, or pipes. So remember, we set, back in our RISA-3D model, we set our columns to be channels. So that's why RISA-3D and RISAConnection is telling us we're having an invalid shape, because, hey, we've done a channel versus the other allowable limits, and we've exceeded the limits of what RISAConnection can do because it can only do wide flanges and tube shapes. So if I undo that, and go back to my wide flanges, you can see, and I'll just quickly again solve this for just the first little combination so that you can see. And then I'm going to again solve just quickly for my design connections. And so now you can see that that error has corrected itself by us simply changing the shape to help us, to help the program essentially read in that connection and not have invalid errors anymore. Another helpful thing when troubleshooting, like I said, is back in this help file, you can look at all these available connection types. Another thing is down here, we can start to look at this RISA-4, RISA-3 integration. So here in the RISA-4, RISA-3 integration, today I went through your integration of RISA-3D and RISAConnection, but RISAConnection also integrates with RISA-4. So in this section of your help file, it's going to go through many of the steps that I just explained. It's going to show you how to show your connection grouping, how to group your behavior, solving connections. So looking at solving by your connection, your group, or even your whole project file. And it's going to basically explain a lot of the steps that I've shown and explained to you today. It's also going to explain to you round tripping. So round tripping is, again, going from that RISAConnection file back to our RISA-3D file with our export. And then also it's going to give you additional information, like I told you about the dangers and about detaching and what you want to make sure before you accept to do that detach. Another great troubleshooting piece that we have is really our blog. And our blog is going to be at our blog.risa.com, and you can get that through our Learn, and you can go through our tips and tricks here. And through tips and tricks, you can go here and then you can type in either your keywords. So if we're looking at, maybe you have additional questions if you're modeling your seismic connections. So you can start to look in here, start to type in seismic, and it'll start to put up additional articles that we've written on how to define and assign those seismic brace connections. Or if you just want to look at RISAConnection in general here on our blog, you can just click this button here, and it's going to filter several articles that are catered to specifically RISAConnection and helping you explore the features and availability there. So again, if I type in here in my seismic, I can start to look at different assigning seismic loads in RISA-3D, So those articles are going to pop up with different information for you so that you can see your seismic brace connections, how to assign those, what do those mean, and then you can scroll down, start to get additional information on those. And so that's just one of the additional troubleshooting ways that we have. But let's say you've exhausted the help file, you've exhausted our blog articles, you're saying, well, what do I do now? And we still have you covered. Here is our technical support. And this link in our help file is going to link you to our email where you can email us your model file extensions, either your RISAConnection extensions or your RISA-3D model that already has the connections assigned into it, ready for integration. So we have several support for you. We have blog articles, we have the help file, but know that we also are here as a team of engineers to help you as well. The last thing I did want to show you was looking back at those seismic connections. So if I close back here in RISAConnection, because this is one of the great features of seeing or using this model is here in my seismic diagonal brace, and I select one of my connections. So remember I showed you my load combinations that you can assign, and I just did the single load combination for this last example, but remember we had to assign our seismic design rules to the members, and then we had to assign a seismic connection type. So all of that feeds into what comes into RISAConnection. So here, where we didn't see for our base plate connections that we were looking at earlier, we can see for this seismic connection, we now have a category called seismic detailing. And so under seismic detailing, it's going to have our seismic system assigned, and you can see here it's grayed out. So anytime you have a grayed out component or property here in RISAConnection, it means that it's being fed in or controlled by our integrated RISA-3D file. So that's what's really great about the integration, is that you're not having to double set or repeat a lot of the already did to assign connections and set up your seismic rules in RISA-3D. It's all coming in here transferred so that it can help you design your connections with the information that you've already designed from RISA-3D. So that was really the last tip and trick really I wanted to show you when using the integration between RISAConnection and then RISA-3D. Again, RISAConnection does integrate with our RISA Floor software as well. So it's going to be a similar functionality that you'll get to use if you're using RISA Floor. And then I want to give you these last, support resources. We talked about reaching out to us through email with support@risa.com. We talked about our tips and tricks category, which is our blog.risa.com. And then we also have our help, our videos as well, which has a lot of video training for RISAConnection, as well as our other software. We have training. So trainings which can be virtual or in-person training sessions for our other softwares as well. And you can visit that by going to our training at RISA.com. And lastly, our webinars. So webinars like this, but we also have online webinars that are pre-recorded, which do offer PDHs as well.
All right, so before we finish up here, we do have a few just random questions that we can go ahead and answer. Candice, would you mind showing just the option to export a DXF file for a connection? You don't have to show it, just showing that as an option.
Yeah, so here in our RISA, I'm back in RISAConnection, and so you can go up here to our file, and then down here under export. And so this is where you can export your DXF as a single connection, or again, if you're using the great integration from RISA-3D that has all these connections that you've already assigned to it, you can export all of your connections. So those are the two options kind of there.
Yeah, so one of the questions was, how do you change if you had like multiple base plates in a group, how would you change the parameters of the base plate or whatever connection at the same time?
So if, for example, going back to our base plate, so I kind of showed you when we're looking at the base plate groups. So when you click on that overall group in your Project Explorer over here, you can come down and you can change in your components. You can change these components down here by clicking on the base plate, and then you can start to assign the different length, width. If you want to look at your anchor bolts layouts, you can change that as well over here. Maybe you want to change the bolt diameter size. And so that's going to change it for all the base plate designs that are assigned in that group. And then you can then now go in and then resolve for that entire group. And so then all those base plates are going to be assigned for.
So this is just a random question. This is more about other, and I can answer this one really quickly. If you're designing foundations, so RISAConnection and RISA Foundation integrate with RISA-3D and the director kind of in parallel or in series. So essentially you could jump from RISA-3D to RISAConnection first and do your connection design, or you could jump from RISA-3D to RISA Foundation and first do your foundation design. There really isn't a difference with that. The only difference I could see is that if because of the connection design, you would need to change some of the member sizes, and some of that member size change would change the stiffness of the model or the load distribution of the model. That may slightly, ever so slightly, change the reactions that you would have on at boundary conditions, which then would obviously change the reactions that get transferred to RISA Foundation for foundation design. So in that sense, again, do you have to do them in any particular order? No, but like if I had to pick one, it would probably be to do RISAConnection first, because that's kind of the superstructure, part of the superstructure, and then proceed to substructure stuff with RISA Foundation.
And then I see the question about solving connections in RISA-3D. So that's where I kind of showed you when we were looking at our troubleshooting, is here when you're doing your solve. There's an option here after you solved your maybe you did a single or envelope or a batch solution, there's an option here where you design connections. And so that's going to solve your connections and show that those results within your RISA-3D model. So here, if I resolve this, it's going to launch RISA-connection in the background because it's still using RISA-connection to solve the connections, but then you can still have this information now in but now you have this information where you don't have to necessarily use the director function of RISA-connection to solve your connection results, if that makes sense. And then also over here, if you're familiar with RISA-3D's detail reports, where you can select, individual members, you also have an option here in RISA-3D to look at your connection detail results. And so here, if you click on that, you can select the member in that you want to look at, and it's going to pull up the connection detail report for that connection that you selected in RISA-Connection. And you can see that here if I switch back to RISA-Connection. Another added benefit is if I wanted to minimize this, you see now I can have RISA-3D and RISA-Connection open at the same time, which is a little bit of a different functionality that you may be not familiar with when using integration between RISA Floor or RISA-3D. You have to, one opens and another one closes. Well, here you can pull up and look at your RISA-3D file, use your connection detail report, select the member, and then you can still have RISA-Connection open over here to look at the detail report as well. So that's another added functionality and benefit for having both programs, because you can have them open at the same time to look at your results. And so you can look at your results and your detail reports for the connections here in RISA-Connection, while also being able to graphically navigate where those connections lie here in your RISA-3D model. Because I know a lot of us now are starting to work more graphically in our RISA-3D models. So sometimes it gives you better context of where that connection is, and be able to then help that inform what you're doing in RISA-Connection. Sure, we can look at the load combinations.
Yeah, let's do the last one, node combinations. Yeah.
So load combinations, this is more specific to RISA-3D versus RISA-Connection. So generating load combinations, just like with any of our spreadsheets, you can enter them manually by hitting enter, and it's going to clear my results. And I can enter in a test, load combination here, and enter in the values and the basic load cases that I want here. Or you can use our load combination generator up here, and you can choose the load combination code, whether you're ASD or LRFD, and you can generate those as well. And you can do that for gravity, wind, and seismic. So, but yeah, that was more of a RISA-3D, how to generate load combinations. And those, like I said, go into RISA-Connection automatically using your director. And those would go into those by going to this design tab and then looking at your RISA-Connection column here. And that shows you which load combinations are going to transfer to your RISA-Connection to help you with your connection design. I think that's all the open questions that we had.
Yeah, if you have any further questions, please feel free to reach out to us. You can reach out. I know we got a few questions I think that were kind of model specific, that I would reach out to support@risa.com with those very specific questions. If you have development requests, please also reach out to support@risa.com. That's the best way to get either your issue, or if you've got a feature request or something like that, into the development team. That would be the best way to do that. Finally, if you're new, if you came to the webinar and you don't own RISA-Connection or don't own RISA-3D, and you're interested in learning more beyond the webinar that Candace just gave, you can reach out to info@risa.com, and we can schedule a one-on-one kind of meeting where we can go through RISA-3D, RISA-Connection, or any RISA product from that matter, or we can get you a quote or direct you to the appropriate place to try the software or to buy the software. So again, that's info@risa.com is for the sales stuff, and support@risa.com for anything support related. But thanks for bearing with us with a few of the technical difficulties that we had in the beginning. And we look forward to talking with you in a future webinar. So thanks very much, everybody.